It all began on what should have been an ordinary summer morning in the quiet, picture-perfect suburb of Brookside Hills. The air was heavy with the scent of freshly cut grass, sprinklers ticked rhythmically in the distance, and the hum of early cicadas wrapped the neighborhood in its usual seasonal lull. But that calm was just the surface. Beneath it, the first ripples of a petty storm were already forming. For years, I'd been living in my two-story home with Max, my golden retriever. Max wasn't just a dog, he was my companion, my hiking buddy, my unofficial greeter for anyone who came near the front gate. He had this uncanny ability to sense moods, perking up for good news, curling up quietly when days felt heavy. And in the summer, his favorite place in the entire world was the community pool. Arwa had always been a stickler for appearances, lawns trimmed to regulation height, mailboxes in the same exact shade of Brookside brown, holiday decorations strictly removed within 48 hours after the season. But when it came to the pool, the rules had been, for the most part, reasonable. Pets weren't officially banned. In fact, several neighbors brought their dogs on quiet weekday mornings when the pool wasn't crowded. No one minded, at least, no one with any sense of decency. That morning, Max and I headed down to the pool like we'd done countless times before. The sun was already glinting off the water, and the sound of gentle waves lapping against the edge was enough to get Max's tail wagging furiously. He trotted beside me, leash loose, eyes locked on the shimmering blue ahead. I unclipped his leash once we were inside the gate, and he bounded toward the shallow end. His paws splashed into the water, sending droplets into the air that caught the sunlight like tiny crystals. He swam lazy circles while I sat on a lounge chair, sipping my coffee and watching the morning come alive. But then, like a cold shadow crossing a warm day, came the sound of high heels on concrete. Sharp, deliberate. It was Mrs. Carmichael. Every HOA had a Mrs. Carmichael. She was the kind of neighbor who took her position on the board as if it were a role of national importance. Always dressed in pressed linen slacks, always carrying a clipboard, always ready to point out the smallest perceived infraction. She stopped short when she saw Max, her lips pressing into a thin line. I could feel the disapproval radiating from her like heat off asphalt. She didn't speak to me, just scribbled something on her clipboard before turning on her heel and marching out of the pool area. At the time, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe she was making a note about the missing umbrella stand. Maybe she just didn't like dogs. I didn't know then that this was the start of something bigger. 2 days later, an envelope appeared in my mailbox. The HOA seal stamped on the corner told me all I needed to know before I even opened it. Inside was a letter printed in the sort of stiff, formal language that only exists to make small problems sound like high crimes. Effective immediately, it read, "The presence of any animal within the pool area is strictly prohibited. Failure to comply will result in fines and potential suspension of community privileges." I stared at the words. It wasn't just that Max was no longer welcome, it was that they'd changed the rules overnight, without so much as a community vote. I knew exactly who had pushed it through. The following week felt different. Neighbors who once waved from their lawns now looked away as I passed. Conversations seemed to stop when I approached. The undercurrent of HOA politics had turned into a quiet, deliberate freeze-out. I tried reasoning with the board, but my emails went unanswered. The few responses I did get were vague. The decision has been made for the safety and comfort of all residents, as if Max, with his sunny disposition and obsession with tennis balls, was somehow a threat. But the thing about Max was, he didn't know any of this. He didn't understand that the pool, his place of joy, was now off limits. On warm days, he'd stand at the window, looking toward the direction of the pool, tail thumping hopefully. And each time, I'd have to find some excuse to distract him, take him for a walk around the block, anything to keep him from noticing where we weren't going anymore. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. This wasn't about safety. It wasn't about community comfort. It was about control, about one person's ability to decide who and what belonged. And in Brookside Hills, once the HOA made a decision like this, they didn't reverse it. That's when the idea began to form. If the HOA wanted to keep Max out of their precious pool, fine. He didn't need their pool. He could have his own. Not just a pool, but something better, something the HOA couldn't touch. I started sketching ideas late at night, long after the neighborhood had gone quiet. A series of shallow splash areas, fountains, a lazy river for dogs. Something that wasn't just functional but fun, an entire water park built with Max in mind. The thought of it kept me going, even as the letters from the HOA continued, threatening escalating fines for continued noncompliance, despite the fact I hadn't taken Max near their pool since the ban. The only question now was how far I was willing to go to make it happen. Because in Brookside Hills, nothing stayed secret for long, and I had no doubt that once the HOA caught wind of my plan, they'd find a way to shut it down. But I also knew something they didn't. When you back someone into a corner, you can't be surprised when they come out swinging. And I was ready to swing. Once the decision was made, there was no going back. The HOA might have shut the gate on Max, but in doing so, they'd opened another door entirely. A door to something bigger, louder, and more spectacular than their chlorinated rectangle of water could ever be. The first step was research. I needed to know what it would take to build a water park for dogs, not just a kiddie pool in the backyard, but something that would give Max the same joy he felt at the community pool. Late nights turned into early mornings as I scrolled through online forums, read about filtration systems safe for animals, and watched countless videos of canine splash pads. I studied the materials, the water flow rates, even the kind of non-slip surface that would keep Max's paws safe. My backyard wasn't massive, but it was big enough to make a statement. The plan was to dig a main pool about 2 feet deep for swimming, with a gradual entry slope so Max could wade in and out easily. Around it, I envisioned a series of shallow basins connected by trickling streams, small fountains, and maybe even a lazy river loop that circled the yard. The more I planned, the more it became clear this wasn't just about Max anymore. This was about reclaiming a piece of happiness the HOA thought they could take away. It was about proving that they didn't have the power to dictate every square foot of my life. But in Brookside Hills, any significant change to your property required HOA approval, and I knew there was no universe in which they'd sign off on this. Which meant the project would need to start quietly. The first shipment arrived a week later. Boxes of PVC pipes, pump systems, and waterproof liners stacked neatly in my garage. The sound of a delivery truck rumbling into the neighborhood drew curious glances from a few neighbors, and I could already feel the gossip beginning. In a community where the biggest scandal last month was someone painting their shutters one shade too dark, this was prime entertainment. I hired a small construction crew, the kind willing to work without broadcasting every detail of the job. They arrived early in the mornings, before Mrs. Carmichael's daily inspection walks began. We measured, marked, and broke ground while most of the neighborhood was still sipping coffee. The smell of freshly turned earth filled the air, mingling with the faint chemical tang from the cement mix. Max was in heaven. Every day, he'd watch from the patio as holes became trenches, and trenches began to take shape as pools. His tail wagged like a metronome, keeping time with the sound of shovels hitting dirt. But keeping it quiet couldn't last forever. By the third week, the sound of power tools was impossible to ignore. One morning, as we were laying the first waterproof liner, I spotted Mrs. Carmichael's unmistakable silhouette at the end of my driveway. She didn't come up to the house, just stood there, clipboard in hand, staring. That afternoon, I found the first notice of non-compliance in my mailbox. The language was deliberately vague: unapproved alterations to property detected. Cease all construction until proper approvals have been obtained. It was exactly what I'd expected, and exactly what I was prepared to ignore. The crew kept working. I knew the HOA could send as many letters as they wanted, but without proof of a specific rule violation, all they had was empty threats. My property was fenced, and the design stayed just inside all setback lines. Technically, I wasn't breaking any rules, at least, not yet. By the end of the month, the skeleton of the water park was complete. The main pool gleamed under the afternoon sun, its gentle slope perfect for a dog's entrance. The smaller basins were in place, each with its own trickle of water spilling into the next. We'd even installed a small overhead sprayer shaped like a fire hydrant, because if I was going to do this, I was going to have fun with it. Max's first test swim was a moment I'll never forget. As soon as I turned on the pump and the water began to circulate, he bounded in without hesitation. He paddled across the pool, shook himself off, then darted toward one of the fountains, snapping at the streams like they were a game just for him. Watching him made every dollar, every hour of lost sleep, every HOA letter worth it. But my victory was short-lived. 2 days later, a certified letter arrived, not the usual printout slipped into the mailbox, but one that required a signature. Inside was a formal, cease and desist order, this time citing unauthorized water feature construction, and threatening fines of $250 per day until the project was removed and restored to its original condition. I read the letter twice. They weren't just trying to stop me now, they wanted the water park gone. The war had officially begun. I could feel the shift in the neighborhood. Some residents avoided eye contact altogether. Others, more quietly rebellious, gave small nods or smiles when they thought no one else was looking. And then there were the loyal followers of the HOA, the ones who seemed to think Mrs. Carmichael's word was law. They'd slow their cars as they passed my house, phones held just low enough to hide the fact they were taking pictures. But I wasn't about to let them win. Not when I had proof that their own pool had no official, pet-free, policy until they'd invented it just to target Max. If they wanted a fight, I was going to give them one. And the first step in that fight was simple: make sure the water park became something too big to quietly erase. The kind of thing the entire internet would rally behind. The day after the cease and desist letter arrived, I sat at my kitchen table with the paper spread out in front of me. The words were cold, deliberate, and meant to intimidate. But to me, they were fuel. The wall wasn't just trying to stop a project, they were trying to erase a joy that belonged to my dog. And that was something I wasn't about to allow quietly. The strategy had to change. This was no longer just about building Max a water park in my backyard, it was about making sure the entire community, and maybe far beyond it, saw what was happening. I needed this to be too big, too loud, and too public for the HOA to simply crush with paperwork and fines. I started by documenting everything. Every letter, every threat, every picture of Max enjoying his new water park went into a neatly organized folder. I took video of the pool from different angles, capturing the gentle splash of the fountains, the shimmer of the water in the sun, and the unmistakable joy in Max's tail as he paddled around. I even kept a record of the original HOA bylaws, especially the section about pets in common areas, that, until recently, had been nothing more than a vague guideline. The next step was to share it. I created a short video explaining the situation, not with my voice, but with captions and background music. It was simple: show the letter, show the water park, show Max's happiness, and then show the cold legal threat that had landed in my mailbox. I didn't have to dramatize anything, the contrast spoke for itself. I uploaded the video late at night, thinking it might get a handful of views from friends and a few dog lovers online. I went to bed expecting nothing. By morning, it had exploded. Thousands of likes, hundreds of comments, and shares multiplying by the hour. People weren't just watching, they were furious. They called it petty, cruel, and ridiculous. They posted their own HOA horror stories. They rallied behind Max like he was some kind of four-legged folk hero. And in the chaos of the internet, the story began to take on a life of its own. The attention brought local reporters to my doorstep within days. They wanted to film Max in his water park, to show the unnecessary cruelty of HOA overreach. One news crew even tried to get a statement from Mrs. Carmichael, but she refused to speak on camera. The HOA board issued a carefully worded statement to the news: "Our decisions are made to preserve the safety, cleanliness, and harmony of the community." But online, the comments tore it apart. People pointed out the sudden rule change, the targeted nature of the ban, and the fact that Max's water park was on my private property. The more the story spread, the more isolated the HOA board became. Some members started avoiding public meetings altogether, unwilling to face the scrutiny. Others doubled down, claiming the attention was proof that I was weaponizing public opinion to get my way. But public opinion wasn't the only pressure mounting. My mailbox began to fill with letters from strangers, many offering support, some even offering legal help for free. A local pet store donated a shipment of floating toys for Max's pool, and a nearby dog rescue offered to host an event in my backyard to raise funds for animal shelters. The HOA was livid. Another letter arrived, this one threatening legal action for operating an unapproved commercial enterprise due to the backyard event. They accused me of turning my property into a business, despite the fact that the fundraiser would be free and donation-based. That's when I realized something important: the HOA wasn't just trying to enforce rules anymore. They were trying to break me. They wanted the stress, the paperwork, and the constant threats to wear me down until I caved. But I didn't cave. I doubled down. I agreed to host the fundraiser, inviting the public through social media. On the day of the event, my backyard was alive with splashes, laughter, and barking. Dozens of dogs played in the pools, chased each other around the fountains, and lounged in the shade while their owners chatted and took pictures. Local businesses brought treats, and a small food truck parked at the curb. From the corner of my eye, I spotted Mrs. Carmichael standing at the far end of the street, arms crossed, face tight with disapproval. She didn't come any closer, probably because she knew the cameras were there, but her presence was a reminder that this battle was far from over. By the end of the day, we'd raised thousands for the shelter, and the internet had a new wave of photos and videos to devour. Max's water park had gone from a personal project to a local landmark, and now, dismantling it wouldn't just anger me, it would enrage an entire community of supporters. The HOA's problem was simple. The more they pushed, the bigger the story became. And as much as they wanted this to disappear quietly, they were now locked in a fight they couldn't control. Still, I knew this wouldn't be the end of their attempts. The board was meeting soon, and something told me they were preparing a move that would make the cease and desist letter look like a polite warning. And whatever it was, I'd have to be ready for it. The HOA board meeting that month felt different before it even began. Neighbors whispered about it in passing, their voices low, their eyes darting to make sure no one overheard. There was a tension in the air, like the whole community knew the next move was coming, but no one was brave enough to say what it might be. I didn't attend in person, not because I didn't want to, but because I knew the board had no interest in letting me speak. Instead, I watched the livestream that some residents had quietly started recording, a shaky phone camera set up in the corner of the clubhouse. It didn't take long for my name to come up. The water park was described as a violation of community harmony, a public nuisance, and an unapproved structural alteration. But this time, they weren't just complaining. They had a new weapon. The board announced that they were filing for an injunction to have the water park forcibly removed, claiming it violated multiple property covenants, including one obscure clause about non-traditional recreational structures. It was a rule so outdated that it still mentioned satellite dishes as a prohibited disruption to neighborhood aesthetics. But they were determined to twist it into something they could use against me. Their plan was clear: bury me in legal costs, drag the process out until I either gave up or could no longer afford to fight. And from the way Mrs. Carmichael spoke, her voice tight and sharp, her words chosen with surgical precision, I could tell they thought they had already won. But they underestimated just how much fight I had left. The first step was to get legal representation. I reached out to one of the attorneys who had emailed me after the fundraiser video went viral. She specialized in HOA disputes, and within minutes of reviewing my case, she saw the holes in their argument. The so-called non-traditional recreational structure clause was vague to the point of absurdity. It had never been enforced for backyard playsets, trampolines, or even elaborate garden ponds. Using it now, and only against me, reeked of selective enforcement, a direct violation of their own bylaws. Still, the legal process moved slowly, and in the meantime, the HOA turned up the pressure. Daily, violation notices appeared in my mailbox, citing everything from the color of my fence to the height of my grass. I knew it was retaliation, and I documented every single one. My attorney told me to keep detailed records, because patterns of harassment could become valuable evidence in court. Max, oblivious to the paperwork battle, continued to enjoy his water park as if nothing was wrong. Watching him dart between fountains or float lazily in the shallow pool made it impossible to regret any of this. If anything, it reminded me why I couldn't back down, not now, not when we'd come this far. But the HOA wasn't content to fight me behind the scenes. They started trying to sway public opinion in the neighborhood. Flyers appeared on community bulletin boards warning about unsanctioned gatherings and potential safety hazards at my home. Some residents, either convinced by the scare tactics or eager to stay on the board's good side, began avoiding me altogether. Others, though, saw right through it. A few quietly slipped notes into my mailbox, telling me to keep going, that I was standing up to the kind of petty control they'd all been forced to endure. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind me I wasn't entirely alone in this fight. The turning point came when the board sent a contractor to my property without notice, claiming they needed to inspect the water park for compliance. I caught them on my security cameras, two men in work shirts, one with a clipboard, the other snapping pictures through the fence. My attorney was livid. Not only had they trespassed, but they'd done it under the guise of a rule that didn't apply to private, fenced-in backyards. When I posted the footage online, it set off another firestorm. The video spread quickly, and the internet outrage reignited. People weren't just angry about the pool ban anymore, they were furious about the invasion of privacy. And that was when things shifted. The HOA's carefully maintained image began to crack. Local journalists dug deeper into their history, uncovering a pattern of arbitrary enforcement and questionable spending. Old disputes resurfaced. Residents who had been quiet for years started speaking out, sharing their own stories of unfair treatment. It became clear that this wasn't just my battle anymore, it was the start of something bigger. Still, the legal fight loomed ahead. The injunction hearing was scheduled for the following month, and my attorney warned me that the board would throw everything they had into winning it. If they succeeded, Max's water park would be demolished within weeks. But if we won, the HOA would lose more than just a case. They would lose their control over the narrative, and maybe, just maybe, their grip on the entire neighborhood. The stakes had never been higher. And as the hearing date crept closer, I realized I wasn't just defending a pool. I was defending the right to push back when someone tried to take away something that brought joy, not just to me, but to everyone who saw Max paddling in that sunlit water. The fight was about to reach its peak, and there would be no turning back.